All I'm trying to suggest is that for some reason, I picked this one person to tell a 15-year story about that I believed he was an intelligence construct of probably another country operating in the center of the United States elite. It is by the ability to work over all branches of the decision tree that I've gained confidence. First, that I started talking about this ages ago, and anybody who I've discussed Jeffrey Epstein with will remember me using the word construct even before he was arrested and jailed for solicitation and prostitution of minors. So I've been at this for 15 years, not knowing it was going to end like this. I think many of us have tweeted out that if he was in fact attached to the intelligence community, that he was going to have to die because otherwise these secrets would get out. And am I scared that I'm thinking about releasing this to the general public? Yes, but I'm also scared about not releasing this to the general public. My belief is that this was a poorly constructed operation, and that when it comes to light which intelligence community it was, we are in danger of countries that I care a great deal about being thought to have constructed a pedophilic honey trap using kompromat, to use the Russian word, for that which would be used to control people in order to gain some sort of a geopolitical strategic advantage. Now, I am not of the opinion that Jeffrey Epstein was a savory character. And I'm not saying that he didn't hire prostitutes or coerce women into orgies or what have you. But my guess is that at the moment, he was not using that particular kink of his for children in order to enmesh scientists or other politicians, as the news media sometimes hints at when it is not suggesting that he's simply dead by his own hand. In fact, I think it's extremely dangerous to think about this as being the decision of a country. Now, I'm not going to lie, I've thought that the country might be Israel. And as an American Jew who's lived in Israel, I don't think Israel came to this decision if, in fact, he is a product of the Israeli intelligence network. In fact, this would be something that would be top secret. It would have been decided by a tiny number of individuals. And it is not right to take down a nation based upon the idea that you can't even do intelligence work because you contrive such a ridiculous idea as Jeffrey Epstein in order to gain kompromat and therefore control over influential people inside of another country. What I would believe is instead that this is a tiny program and that these people should come forward, or that we should find them by reinitiating the Church and Pike commissions. There is now so much bizarre stuff of this kind that it is time to revisit the Church and Pike commissions of the mid-1970s to find out what our intelligence and other intelligence agencies may have been up to. We need something to restore our confidence. And when and if we find out that a foreign power has been operating in the U.S., perhaps with our consent, or perhaps we are in fact gaining some benefit from an operation that we could not ourselves do post-Church and Pike, I think what we would do well to realize is that this situation is not the responsibility of any country, but the responsibility of people in the intelligence community who would have gone out of control. Now, do I know this to be true? Absolutely not. Am I infallible? Far from it. I wouldn't have shared with you that I was wrong about Bernie Madoff. In fact, if all of these conspiracy theories turned out to be exactly true. Some of them still remain to be proven. But what I've tried to do is to try to talk to you about the idea that I don't think that this story is being fully explored. I'm extremely dismayed that over a very brief period of time, we went from suggesting that Jeffrey Epstein was allegedly dead by his own hand to believing the medical examiner's report as if this was conclusive. In fact, the charge that he might have been murdered with an understanding of the powers that be that controlled the correctional facility in which he was housed includes the charge that the medical examiner's report would likely have been doctored. That's not an additional charge. You wouldn't murder somebody if the report would conclusively show murder. unless you actually knew that you had enough control over the system to control it all. Furthermore, there has to be a facility that keeps local law enforcement, local medical officers from stumbling over something of high value. You couldn't responsibly run the intelligence community, which has to be able to carry out covert operations, operations that are disturbing, operations that are effective, without constantly fearing that low-level law enforcement and low-level medical examiners could blow the whole thing sky high. Now, whatever the facility is that keeps our high-level intelligence work safe from low-level enforcement could easily have been operative. I don't mean to suggest that it was, only that it is not reasonable to suggest that it is crazy to assume that the medical examiner could be induced to file a report to support an official narrative. It is time to return to investigative journalism we can trust. It is time to return to committees of the House and Senate that have the power to investigate these things, and it is long past due that the intelligence services be revisited. If they, in fact, have very little to hide, then this shouldn't really be a big problem. But at the moment, the American people have lost full confidence in our ability to get to the bottom of truths as to whether foreign countries are meddling in our national elections, as to whether foreign countries are using their ability to send graduate students into the STEM pipeline to spy on us, as to whether foreign countries are using our tech platforms in order to help them with their military advantage over the United States. Now, I really don't want to come back to the Jeffrey Epstein story. So what I'm saying to you is, it's quite possible that Jeffrey Epstein is simply dead by his own hand, that he was a pervy billionaire or near billionaire who had an interest in science and also an interest in young women that ranged from women of perhaps of age 23 down either to 18, 15, 12, what have you. Maybe the official story is true. All I'm trying to suggest is that for some reason, I picked this one person to tell a 15-year story about that I believed he was an intelligence construct of probably another country operating in the center of the United States elite. And I believe that that is an additional piece of information because there's no one else that I've been telling the story about. I've never met another person like this. This is a completely sui generis exception to my general understanding of the world. And I think if I am correct, that there was something very much amiss, that it was obviously amiss, obvious to anybody who wished to see it, just as the world clearly closed their eyes to Jeffrey Epstein's problems when it was found that he was asking for massages from underage girls in Florida. Somebody was turning a blind eye towards this story almost certainly because it was too salacious not to be interesting. It's the kind of a story that would move newspapers. It would sell advertising spots. It's far too juicy for people to take this little of an interest in. And I want to say one last thing about this. Jeffrey Epstein was enmeshed with a guy named John Brockman, who was a guy who in some sense gave me my first break on a larger stage. It is commonly believed at the moment by certain members of the media that John Brockman was complicit in the underage behavior, underage interest that Jeff Epstein showed in young girls. The one thing I can add is that I met John Brockman and his wife Katinka Matson at Stuart Brand's Interval Bar sometime in the last, 1 to 3 years. And when John and I sat down, I can tell you with certainty that John warned me that he had had an interaction with Jeffrey that he had found very disturbing, and that John had been forced to walk out of his house realizing that Jeffrey Epstein had had a problem. Now, John has not come forward, and I don't know that there's anybody else in a position to tell this story. But I can say with some certainty that John was not happy about this, and that if John was, in fact, tolerant of a Hugh Hefner-style person, the person I met had no reason to say this to me, was certainly not okay with Jeffrey Epstein, was in fact warning me away from him when I had no interest in seeing Jeffrey at that point. So I do wish to say that I think that the conspiracy theorizing that I'm seeing is of a lower quality and a lower level. Of course, if you want, I could find out that the entire edge network is somehow at risk and implicated, but I can say as somebody on the very periphery, I wrote no books for John. I didn't go to the billionaires' dinners. I never went to this island. I never flew on the plane. I met him once, and I had a phone call with him afterwards. I can tell you that I don't personally believe that John Brockman was caught up in this at the level that is now being alleged by certain members of the press who I feel are perhaps not as responsible as they might be.